When it comes to spring bass fishing, a crankbait is always a great choice, but unfortunately most fishermen are choosing the wrong one. But that's just the tip of the iceberg because most fishermen are actually fishing their crankbait incorrectly as well. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to choose the correct crankbait for the given conditions, as well as how to fish them properly to ensure that you can catch the most fish this spring. Starting off, let's talk about actual bait selection. In the springtime, most anglers know a red crankbait to be the move for catching a lot of fish. However, with hundreds of options of these crankbaits on the market, we need to go a little bit deeper than that to ensure that we can catch the most amount of fish as possible. And while the spring can be defined as a very large period of time throughout bass fishing, we are going to be looking mostly at just the pre-spawn phase. And that I break up into two different categories: your early spring and then your almost spawning type pre-spawn category. And to break these up, I usually determine by water temperature. Sometimes time of the year and stuff like that can make a difference as well, but if you follow these water temperatures, that will be a good rule of thumb. 40 degrees, or basically as soon as the ice comes off, to roughly 55 degrees, that's going to be that early spring, early pre-spawn category. And then anything 55 to 70, that is going to be that later spring category, with when you get into the 62 to 70 range, fish even starting to spawn. Now for today, we are going to be fishing in that early spring period. You can see we are out on the water for the very first time today. I've been out of town for the past 2 weeks, but the ice just came off about 2 weeks ago, right before I left. And the water is still very, very cold. We're talking probably 47 to 48 degree water temperature today. So with those mid to high 40s water temperatures, we're gonna need to choose our baits accordingly and fish them properly to catch the most amount of fish. So the main thing when it comes to picking a crankbait this time of year is going to be the shape of the bait itself. Now I have two crankbaits in my hand right here, and both of these will work in the springtime if you use them under the right conditions. Now for today, this crankbait would not be the one that I would want to use. This is a standard square bill crankbait. This is the 6th Sense Crush 50X. And the reason I wouldn't want to use this one is because of the wide body shape on this bait. Now, when the water is very cold, your bait fish are very cold and your fish are very cold, so everything's going to move at a much slower pace. When you have a wide-bodied crankbait like this, what happens is it actually wobbles a lot more and puts off more vibration, more movement, and it's very unnatural compared to what the rest of the fish are doing in the water. So what I like to use in the early spring period, anything 55 and below, is going to be a flat-sided crankbait like this one here. This is the 6th Sense Finesse F4. Now both of these crankbaits are in basically identical red colors, and they both go about 4 or 5 feet deep. But basically the only difference is the body shape, and this one is going to have a much tighter wiggle. It's going to look more natural compared to what the fish are doing. Now, when the water gets 55 plus, I will put this crankbait away and I will pick up the square bill again and start using that, because it will catch you more fish and you can fish it a little bit quicker and it deflects off of cover a little bit better. So each of these baits have their pros and cons. I do keep both of them with me, and I use the water conditions to dictate which one I'm going to choose for the given day. Also within that flat-sided crankbait category are the 6th Sense Pressure series here. These two that I have right here are the 4 and the 7. Now the 4 is going to be very similar to both the Finesse F4 and the square bill, because they runs about 4 or 5 foot deep. And this is a silent bait, so it's going to work when that water's a little bit clearer or when the fish are a little bit more pressured, hence the name Pressure series. Now, the one bait that I did include in here is actually the 7, and the 7 has a different bill shape than the rest of these baits combined that we talked about. And this is if you need to get your bait a little bit deeper. A lot of times when those fish are in that low, mid 40 water range, they're not going to be up on the bank all the time, or at least the majority of them won't be. So these 4-foot diving crankbaits aren't really going to cut it. So you need something that gets a little bit deeper, but you still want a flat-sided bait. So this is basically that flat-sided bait, just in a 7-foot running version. Occasionally I will use this one as well in those early springtime periods, but for me, I'm going to be fishing up shallow around these pieces of wood, and I want something that runs shallow and deflects off the cover. So either the Pressure 4, the F4, or the square bill is getting the call for me usually. It just depends on the water conditions. Now, one other thing to look at is the actual color of your bait. And obviously we talked about how red crankbaits are very important this time of year, but why is that? So red in the springtime is not necessarily to mimic crawfish, because electric red crawfish don't fly through the water column as your crankbait does. But what they do a great job of is creating a lot of contrast. The black and red contrast really well, and oftentimes in the springtime you will either have a lot of rain a lot of snow melt, and the water will be very dirty compared to what it is the rest of the year. So you need a bait that stands out in the water for those fish to be able to find it. However, there are other options on the market as well for colors depending upon what your actual water clarity looks like. All lakes are different, so you have to use your body of water to judge what's the best color. And while the red in the spring will pretty much always produce, even if you have clear water, I've caught fish using that in the springtime. A couple other colors that I keep with me are some type of a black back chartreuse. I use this in places where those fish are really feeding on shad, but the water is dirty as well. Even though it's bright yellow, that contrast looks much more like a shad profile as the dark back and the lighter sides than something like a fire orange red. Even though it's bright yellow, it will still mimic shad very, very well. And then if you have very clear water, I like to go with just a standard shad bait here. Something with a white side and a darker back, whatever color combination you like there, something in a very natural color. If you have clear water, those fish are feeding on bait fish, even if they're not shad, this color combination will work great and still perform no matter which size crankbait you choose here, because it's going to mimic bait fish, which is what those fish want to eat. So if you are interested in checking out any of these baits, I will link everything down in the description below. And if you want to use my code Quince on the 6th Sense website, you will save 10% off your order and help the channel out a ton. Lastly, we gotta talk about a rod and reel combo to fish this thing with, and then we're gonna get up on the front deck and get to fishing it and show you how to use this to your advantage. Now, the setup that I have here is the one that I've been using for the past 2 years now, and is the Cash and Core crankbait rod. This rod is just a 7-foot medium heavy power, but it has a moderate fast action. So this has enough backbone for me to deflect and get those fish away from the cover when I get a bite, but it has a ton of tip to it. Especially in these cold water months, you want a ton of flex in your crankbait rod. So when those fish get it, even if they get just the last treble, you can play those fish super light all the way up to the boat, let the flex do the work, and get those fish in the boat without pulling hooks out of them if you had a much stiffer rod. Oftentimes this time of year, they are just gonna slap at the bait. The colder the water, the more notorious they are for doing that. They're just gonna slap at the bait as it comes by, and 1 or 2 of these hooks might get them, and it's just barely going to be hooked. They're not gonna be engulfing that bait all the way down their mouth. So you're gonna have to play these fish very light. To pair up with that rod, I have a Shimano Corrado. This is the 200 series, so it has a little bit bigger spool so I can make a farther cast with my crankbait. And I just spool it up with straight 12-pound test fluorocarbon to allow my bait to get to its maximum diving depth and fish around all this cover that I wanna get it into. So let's get this thing out on the water. We're gonna show you a couple of my favorite little tricks on how to approach this cover differently than you would with your standard crankbait in some warmer water months, and it'll equal a lot more fish in the boat. And before we get out on the water to fish this bait, we have to pick the winner of the giveaway that we did with the $250 budget fishing setup. I have all the comments loaded up in my phone right here, and we are just gonna pick a random one, and that's gonna be the winner of today's giveaway. When I announce the name right here, you will need to reach out to me on Instagram. Just send me a message. You can't message people on YouTube for whatever reason, so message me on Instagram. I'll ask for proof to show that you've done all the things to meet the requirements, and then I'll send that out your way. And the winner of the giveaway is Tug Life Fishing. So go ahead and reach out to me on Instagram. His comment was that he would like to see a fishing knot challenge to see which has a better breaking strength. So let me know if you guys would be interested in that, or if you want to see more videos, challenge fishing, giveaways, stuff like that. Let me know down in the comments below. But congrats, Tug Life Fishing. Go ahead and reach out to me and we'll get that sent your way. But for now, let's get out there and catch some fish. So now that we talked about which crankbaits you should be fishing this time of year, let's walk through how to actually retrieve these types of crankbaits, because when you pair the perfect retrieve with the perfect crankbait together this time of year, that is going to equal the most amount of success. So to do that, the first thing we're gonna do is walk through a standard crankbait retrieve that you would usually do and show you why that probably isn't the best choice, and then we'll walk you through a couple of the little tweaks that I do to help me catch even more fish. So the first thing with a crankbait, it's most often conceived as a search bait, which it is, but when you're fishing it as such, you're most of the time making a long cast, 45-degree angle to the bank like that, and then you're just going to do a standard wind in like this, usually at a pretty good pace. And in doing so, you're using that crankbait to cover water. So you're gonna make that cast and wind it in, and that's pretty much it. It's not doing a whole lot. You might not even be hitting the bottom in some cases because your bait's not in the strike zone or near the fish or near cover or whatever it might be. So let's walk through a couple of the changes that I do to to help me catch even more fish. So to do so, I'm actually gonna change my angle from that 45 to about 90. I'm gonna cast it right down the side of an object. So this works whether you're from a boat or the shore. You would just get up on the shore, which obviously this one would be hard to do, but there's some other ones we'll show you here in just a second, where you would just cast to the end of the laydown and bring it back to you on the bank. Now the one downside to this is you are going to lose some crankbaits. It's just a matter of the deal, but it's also going to be how you get the most amount of bites. You're gonna get snagged a lot. If you're not getting snagged, you are not putting your bait in the right place and you're leaving bites on the table. So those are the two things I'm gonna do. And then once I get my bait in that area, so I pick out this log, I make my 90-degree cast. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reel it down until I feel it hitting the cover, and then I'm gonna slow my reel down as slow as I can to keep it in that strike zone. And then when I bang it off the cover, I'll pause for a second, let it float just a little bit and reel it back down and give it some erratic action. So now if we put all those together, we would fish each one of these logs individually, very slowly and thoroughly, but we can still cover water with a crankbait. So you can do both. It's just fishing it slightly differently than just cast and wind, cast and wind. So now let's put all this together, ease down the bank here, and see if we can catch us a couple on the crankbait. And as you'll be able to tell as I fish my way down this bank, one, I'm fishing extremely slowly, like I talked about. My foot is off the pedal of the trolling motor completely. I'm just letting the wind gently push me down the bank and making accurate casts. And I'm also gonna make multiple casts. I'm gonna change my angle multiple times. I'm gonna fish the left side of the log, then the right side of the log, and try and get my bait in there a few times. And if I feel like I'm missing a piece of the cover, I will actually slow myself down and go back into the wind to try and get that cover fished thoroughly at all angles. As I talked about, 1 or 2 feet can make all the difference this time of year, so you have to treat that as such. So if you throw your bait by a piece of cover that looks really good and you don't get bit on the first cast, that doesn't mean there's not a fish there. It means you might not have thrown it at the very perfect angle that you needed to get that fish to bite. So throw a few more in there just to see what happens. So let's keep working down this wood and see if we can get one to bite. There we go. Got one. Is this a big one? No, not big. Put the poles down. Come here, buddy. Not a big one, but he was super tight up in that cover up there. And you can see they barely get this thing too, because they are not willing to chase this thing down this time of year. They're still willing to eat a crankbait and will bite it out of reaction, but they're not chasing this thing down to like absolutely destroy it or choke on it or anything like that. Sometimes you'll get them to eat it really good if you're putting it in the right spots, but a lot of times they'll just be on the outsides of the mouth. Like I said, not a big one. We'll see if we can get another one here, but we'll talk through what I just did there to catch that little dude right there. See you, buddy. So as you can see, I have this little bush in front of me right here, and I took that 90-degree cast angle and threw it right up in there and just slowly worked it down through the water, and he was able to grab that thing just tucked up tight in those bushes, but he was exactly where he should be. And another super important thing this time of year is to have a very good pair of polarized sunglasses. Even though it's cloudy out today, I can see that this log sticks out just a little bit further here and was able to work my bait down in there. So if you're interested in checking out any of the Waterland sunglasses that I use, you can use my code Quince down below and save 15% off your order. I've been loving using these things, and it is very important to actually see some of these distinct trees that come out a little bit further in the water. Oftentimes that's where you're going to get more bites than anything else, because a lot of people are not seeing those trees in the water because they're not wearing polarized sunglasses. And the other thing those trees do, which today isn't the perfect day for it, but if I had some sun beating down on these trees, that would make it all the more reason for this fish to be up in those areas, because they will get up in those trees, hug tight to them, and since they're a dark color, that sun will absorb into those trees and kind of disperse that heat into the water where they're sitting. I've talked about it numerous times on the channel before. We do have some sun peeking out here and there, but watching the weather leading up to the day of fishing, if you see you have 60-degree weather 3 days in a row with some sun beating down on the banks, and you go and it's only 30 degrees, that doesn't mean the fish aren't up there. It means they probably moved up there over the days leading up to it, and they're going to be huddled in that cover even tighter than they were before. So pay attention to the weather in the springtime leading up to the days of fishing, and use those clues on the water to see if you can catch more fish. So let's work down this bank a little bit more and see if we can get us one more, hopefully one a little bit bigger than that one. There we go. Giant one. Got her. Look at that one. Absolutely beautiful fish right there on the 6 cents flat. Let's see what she weighs. Let's find out. Probably a 4-pounder. While we're weighing this fish, there was a log that sticks down in the water here, and there's a bunch of bait all around it. And I was pulling my crankbait out, I bounced it off the log, and she grabbed it, just slowly letting it work through all those pieces of cover, and that's where they want to be. This one was almost a 4-pounder, 3 3/4. Close though. And while a crankbait is an amazing spring bass fishing lure to catch fish just like this, check out this video right here if you want to see what bait I like to pair with that to catch even more fish, and hit the subscribe button down below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.